Hi, welcome everybody. This is our mini session on self-care, and this mini session is designed for those of you who are working, volunteering, or living in high stressful or trauma environments. During this mini session, we're going to talk about the ways that our work, volunteer, or lived experience in that toxic stress or in that trauma can affect us, some consequences of not taking care of ourselves, and what we can do about it when we start feeling that we are getting out of balance in our own care as we care for others. So to start us off, let's take a look at a really great quote that really touches upon what it means to work or live in environments that we are caring for others who have high trauma or high toxic stress. I love this quote because it really gets to the heart of how the trauma of others, the crisis of others affects us personally. And to think that we could be immersed in suffering and loss of another person and that we are not going to be affected by that is really unrealistic. And we have to keep that in the forefront of our mind as we continue this work, this volunteering, and this lived experience moving forward, and how we can care for ourselves so that we can effectively care for others. So when we talk about self-care, it's really about not just those you are working with or assisting or caring for, it's also about you, right? We call this self-care, and it's really, really important for those of you who are in this field or who are having the lived experience of caring for somebody with high stress and high trauma in their lives. And I love the quote at the bottom of this, it's not about it being the glass half empty or half full. It's really about recognizing and remembering that the glass is always refillable. We can always refill ourselves so that we can help others refill themselves as well. So let's start off with just talking a little bit about stress. Stress gets a really bad rap, and it's actually good for you. I know that sounds a little weird, or it sounds a little, off, but stress is actually a really, really good thing for all of us. It is a completely normal part of life. It is a hardwired component to all human beings, and it is really helpful for us in small doses. And that's the key concept right here, is that stress motivates us, it gets us going, it helps us perform at our peak, and it helps us become more resilient over time, but in small doses. Now, when we talk about the volunteering, the work, or the lives you live where you might be surrounded by a lot more toxic stress or trauma, we have to be self-care aware for ourselves also. So what does that mean when we don't do that? Part of not doing that when we assist others, care for others who have a lot of stress or trauma in their lives, is we can get what's called vicarious trauma. Many of you have probably heard about vicarious trauma. It's stated a lot in various mental health and trauma fields. But really what the bottom line to vicarious trauma is that it is really taking on the trauma of somebody else. So what does that mean in the real world? Well, what that means in the real world is that when you are surrounded by or assisting or helping somebody who's had a high toxic stress or high trauma experience, part of that caring or part of that helping of the other person starts to change you. It starts to change your psychological well-being, your physical well-being, and your spiritual well-being. So for example, if you had somebody you cared about who was assaulted out of nowhere, and it was highly traumatizing, and this person was a survivor of this assault, what it would mean when you have vicarious trauma is that learning about the assault of the person that you cared about starts changing your own safety rituals, starts changing maybe your sleep habits, starts changing how you react to the world around you. Maybe you are having nightmares now. Maybe you double check locks, 5 times because you're not sure that it's completely locked, or maybe you start to have panic attacks. So the real thing around vicarious trauma is when somebody else's experience now affects how you react to the world around you and how you kind of have a sense of safety in this world. So it's their trauma, but you are acting as if it was yours. So another consequence we have from caring for those who have high trauma, high toxic stress is around burnout. Now, burnout is really about that, being overloaded, having, loss of joy, being emotionally, physically, and mentally exhausted by caring for others. The difference between vicarious trauma and burnout is that burnout's not going to change your worldview, your safety, your psychological well-being, or your behaviors. So burnout is kind of that cost of caring and really losing that passion for helping others, but it doesn't in turn change your behavior or habits that you have around safety and well-being. Now, the last one is around compassion fatigue. One of the consequences of caring for others and neglecting to care for ourselves is where we start losing the compassion for the suffering and the pain of others. We start having our own decreased experiences of pleasure. We're exhausted. We start having more of a pessimistic view on others, or this, kind of lack of caring for what we used to have a lot of joy or have a lot of desire to help others with. It's really losing that desire to be connected to others and to do this work and to care for those in our lives that we love who may have a lot of trauma experiences or stress or toxic stress experiences. Now, all of these consequences really throw our mind-body balance out of whack. Now, what does that mean? Well, for us, it's really this recognition of understanding that your mind and your body are completely interconnected, okay? So when we have a lack of caring for ourselves and staying in balance, it affects us physically, it affects us emotionally, it affects us mentally, psychologically. And part of self-care is really understanding that this mind-body connection has to also be the connection in how we help ourselves heal and get back to what we call homeostasis. Now, I really like visuals, so when I think about getting back to that balance, I think of like a teeter-totter. And when it comes to the toxic stress side of the teeter-totter, the only way that we can get back to balance is by resetting or increasing our own personal self-care so that we can start balancing back to a place of health and wellness and well-being. So self-care gets a lot of kind of talk right now, and we really should look at what does it mean and what does it not mean. There's a lot of confusion around what does it mean to have good self-care, what does that look like, does it cost a lot, and what does self-care actually mean on the ground level? Well, the foundational components I hope you leave here really being mindful of moving forward is that self-care must be individualized to you, not to anyone else, but to you. It has to reflect your culture, your interests, your joys, your finances, your creativity, your values. There is no one set of self-care techniques to help us with ongoing wellness and ongoing balance. It has to be around what you feel refills your cup. So when we talk about self-care, it really follows the ABCs of health. So when we talk about A, again, we always start with just being aware, right? It's accepting and acknowledging that we are changed by what we do and the lives we live, especially if you work or you volunteer or you live in environments that concentrates on the caring of others, okay? It's about understanding things like vicarious trauma and burnout and compassion fatigue, and what does that look like when we start heading down that path to unwellness and getting out of balance. And it's also about knowing what renews you. So we have this mental awareness of, am I doing well? Stuff does affect me, and where do I renew myself? And it's about maintaining a balance in your life. So the B's of the ABCs of health when it comes to self-care is really about making sure that we attune to us holistically, right? It's about, am I at balance in my work? Am I at balance in my rest? Am I at balance in my play? Having your own personal life is okay. And it's actually really, really healthy. For some of us who are in these caring fields, that can get really tough because we feel that sometimes, when we care for ourselves, then that means that we are negating others. But we have to be sure that we can acknowledge and validate that we also need our own lives, our own joyful activities, and our own pleasure as well, right? And it's about that with the mind and the body balance. So when we talk about the C's of health, it's really around connection. And we'll talk more about connection and relationships as a self-care strategy. But part of the ABCs of self-care is making sure that we are mindfully attuned to ourselves, checking for those signs and symptoms, checking for our feelings of health and well-being, connecting to other people, being sure we're not getting into the habits of isolation, making sure that we can look into connecting to something larger than ourselves. Some people that is a spiritual capacity, some it's around nature. And it's also when we connect to ourselves and others, we increase that validation and hope for health and well-being for ourselves, as well as health and well-being for others. Making sure that we can connect to paths and journeys that continue to inspire us, continue to have us have a feeling of purpose and joy, and that we have meaning in our lives, in our work, in our volunteering, and in our communities. So let's take a look though at what self-care is not. This gets really confused. I like to spend a little bit of time here because I really want to be sure that you leave knowing that self-care is not just for burnt out people. It's not something you do after the fact, after you're burnt out, after vicarious trauma hits. Self-care is a lifelong habit. It is something we should incorporate into our lives daily, as well as when we start seeing those signs and symptoms of toxic stress within ourselves, right? It's not just for weak people. It's not for people who can't handle it. It is for all of us, right? Self-care is not selfish. It's not narcissistic. It is not something that if we take care of ourselves, it means that we then have less caring for others. In reality, it's actually opposite. The more we care for ourselves and the more we have personal health and well-being, the more equipped we are to be of greater help to others and to those we love, work with, or volunteer with. It's also not just about the fluff and the fun. I teach on this class in other sessions, and one of the things that comes up a lot is, oh, I just can't afford self-care. I don't have the time for it, because self-care somehow gets connected to like manicures and pedicures and vacations and spa treatments and all these really expensive fluff and fun components to taking care of ourselves. There are so many ways to do self-care that cost $0. And we're even going to talk about some that might just take like 90 seconds of your day throughout the day, where you can just get back to a mindfulness place of rebalancing and just getting recentered again. So it's not about the expensive, I have to spend all this money, I have to take 3 hours out for myself. It's not this luxury, this self-indulgent component to your lives. And so we really have to kind of break that myth and break that stigma so that we can practice it ourselves and be good models for others in good self-care as well. So we looked at who needs self-care, what are the consequences of not doing good self-care, What happens when we get out of balance in this work or this volunteering or in these lived experiences caring for others? So what can we do about it? If we know that it's important and we know that it is something that keeps us at our peak and at our best, what can we do? Well, let's take a look at a few self-care strategies that you might be able to use in your daily lives. I also encourage you to do some ongoing education and look at other components too. Look at other ways, because remember what we talked about originally. Self-care is individualized to you. Some of these might be things you're interested in and some of them might not be. Some of them might make you feel in balance and some might not. So you have to find what your ABCs of self-care health is for you. So one of the first ones I always like to talk about is rhythm. Rhythm is a fabulous way to help the body rebalance. All human beings have a predisposition to find rhythm soothing. So why is this? Without getting too in-depth into science and biology, the foundations of it is in utero, as you were being formed and you were growing, one of the constants as your brain was formulating was the heartbeat of the mother. So during this time, rhythm was a constant in your growth and well-being. So once we move forward in life, the body still equates rhythm to being very soothing. It is not infrequent to have people find rocking in a rocking chair, driving in a car, swaying back and forth, music, poetry, these things to be very soothing to the mind and the body. Some ideas around rhythm which really seem to help people is around things like drumming or dancing or tapping. Tapping's getting a lot of recognition where we help teach youth and adults that tapping on different parts of the body can be soothing. They can be around walking or running or jogging, going on a swing set and just swinging back and forth. It could be a variety of different things, but it has a rhythmic component to soothing when we feel kind of distressed or out of balance. That's also around like the body movement piece, what we call the kind of the sensory rhythmic regulation of the body. So a few other ways that we can look at helping the body kind of rebalance itself back to health and well-being is around aromatherapy. There is a great deal of research that certain scents help us to feel certain ways. How many of you have ever heard that lavender helps to calm people down? It's really good for sleep. This is to be shown in the brain to have a very soothing, calming effect. There are many other scents that you could look into that might bring you a sense of balance and well-being. For myself, I really like citrus smells. So if I get really kind of activated or out of balance myself, I keep a little dollar store lotion of like a lemon scent or a mandarin scent or an orange, and I'll just rub it on my hands and just smell it for a while. And that helps me to have at least a start to kind of calming back down. A few others, like cinnamon has been shown to kind of boost brain power, memory, and productivity. Again, lemon has been a stress reducer, and so has been shown to kind of create some of those anti-stress chemicals in the body. Peppermint is a very popular scent also for helping people feel alert and kind of awake and ready to go. So really look into aromatherapy. Smells might be like a vanilla, might be something that makes you feel more calm and more soothed, and it's something we can do all the time in any environment. So the next I want you to know about is belly breathing. Belly breathing touches on two things. Number one, it goes back to rhythm, okay? And second, the brain associates being in a place of calm with the lower you breathe. Now, why is this? Well, number one, we were all born belly breathers. And as we age and get older, we start to breathe higher up in the body. Now, if you think about somebody who's having like a panic attack or an anxiety attack, I mean, where do they breathe from? The majority of time, they're breathing from really high up, even up into the collarbone area, like the higher you breathe, the more the brain associates you in being in a distressful situation or distressful circumstance. So one of the great tricks costs you nothing, and you can do it anytime, privately, in an office, at home, at work, wherever you are, is to take a moment and mindfully breathe from the deep belly. We can do this for like 90 seconds, maybe a couple minutes, and just push the belly out and let it go back in, and then push the belly out and let it go back in. This is a great way to help the body rebalance and send those signals to the brain that you are not in distress, that you are okay, that you are back to balance. And it'll again start that process of getting your teeter-totter back the way it needs to be. The very last one is relationships. We are relational creatures. And just like I talked about in connection with the ABCs, when we talk about relationships, there's a component in your brain that gives a pleasure reward when we speak to, interact with, or connect with those we care about or those we want to care about. When we start losing that relational connection, we might try to seek from the brain's perspective that same pleasure reward, but from other areas of life. So if I'm in more isolation, my teeter-totter's out of balance, I'm not getting that relational reward from the brain, I might replace that with carbs and bread, or chocolate, or ice cream, or alcohol, or just these other external ways that the brain is still trying to reach that pleasure place, but instead of with others and with people, we're replacing it with chemicals, food, shopping, or those type of things. So relational connections are really important. You know, calling up somebody, just saying hi, sending a text, writing something on social media, these different ways where we can connect to people that helps us stay in balance and refill that cup back up. So another one we could look at is visualization and guided imagery. This is another mindfulness practice. It's really about either self-creating or having something to look at that creates an image or a movie in the mind of something that is soothing, pleasurable, and joyous to you, right? When we do that, it helps the brain secrete what I like to call the happy chemicals, and that continues to kind of calm down the amygdala and kind of calm down the limbic system, the brain, and get us back to a place of starting on a journey of joy and happiness. Now, why this works is really interesting. When we talk about the brain, it's cognitively, so up you know, in your cognitive area, we know the difference between reality and fantasy. But when it comes to like the limbic or our fight, flight, freeze response, we don't. So it's kind of like when you watch a horror movie, you know that the horror movie's on TV or that it's on a movie screen. You know it's not real. You know that it was made in Hollywood. But when the bad guy jumps out, right, we react with this fight, flight, freeze response, and we jump, and our pupils dilate, and our muscles get tense, and we have that big adrenaline rush because in that moment, the brain registered that as real. The same can happen with positive imagery, right? We can do these guided, positive, happy, joyous pictures in our head, which the brain will then chemically associate as real and help to calm us down and get us back to balance. There are many ways in technology. You'll see that on the last section here in this slide, where we can use apps, YouTubes, different videos, or different uses of technology to help us do some of those guided mindful imagery techniques. Nutrition and sleep, always really positive for getting your teeter-totter back into balance. Proper sleep is going to look different for different people. I personally could do 10 hours a day every day, and that's like my happy, refillable wellness place. Now, for somebody like my daughter or my friends, they could run on 5 or 6 hours a day, and that's where their individualized health and well-being is. So it's really a mindfulness practice for you to find out where your balance around sleep is, and really being sure that we schedule that time out to let the body heal, let the mind heal, get back to that balance and homeostasis, and regenerate our health and well-being. Nutrition, obviously is fabulous. I highly encourage hydration. Water is so good for you. Our mind and our body can get dysregulated when we are dehydrated. Really trying to avoid as much of those complex carbohydrates, those sugars, because it can spike chemicals in the brain and kind of get us dysregulated. And also being sure that we look into different types of nutritional things that we know do help us, especially in good mental health, like omega-3 fatty acids, and different vitamins, nutritional supplements, and so on. So just being really mindful of what we're putting into our body, because what we do know is, again, the body and the mind are interconnected. You cannot separate them. So if we are feeding ourselves well, if we are hydrating ourselves well, it affects our emotional, mental, and psychological balance as well, okay? So I know that was a lot of information in a short period of time, but please be mindful that, there is no quick fix to this. This is a journey. This is a process. Some of the things we try are going to be awesome. And some of the things we try is not going to be what works for us. And we just reset and we try again. And that's okay. Okay. This is a journey of finding out what works for you, a journey on seeing what brings you joy, a journey on how do we regenerate ourselves so that we can give to others and have health and well-being across the continuum of our communities, right? And I really love this quote because it just reminds me so much of how much value I have, as well as the value that I have in helping others. And the Buddha says that if your compassion does not include yourself, it is incomplete, right? And I love the word incomplete because to me that means that I still have a chance to change that and work on that and make it whole and complete again, right? It doesn't say that if it doesn't include ourselves, it's a disaster. The Buddha says it's incomplete and we have some work to do, okay? So thank you so much for joining me for this mini session. I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you again on another video. All right, bye-bye.